Hi, I'm Sunny and welcome to the Well-Read Society. I am here to tell you about 10 books that I've read the past year, so in 2021, that I'm recommending to you in 2022, and I'll be doing all of that in 10 minutes. That's a lot of numbers in a very short amount of time. I'm a woman of words, not numbers, so I'm already exhausted. But anyway, let's get into the recommendations. I'd just like to preface this video by warning you that for some reason, probably masochism, I tend to pick books that have sadder tones or themes. So if you are sensitive to some of these subjects, a lot of these books will not be for you, but if you're okay reading about them, then carry on. So I don't have a copy of the first book I'm mentioning because I left it at my parents' home, but it's On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Vuong. It is a semi-autobiographical novel that follows a character called Little Dog. We follow his journey as he navigates his identity as a Vietnamese American, the intergenerational trauma that comes with surviving abuse and war. Also, it raises questions of sexuality and masculinity. It's incredibly poetic, raw, and unlike anything I've ever read before. It's definitely a good read, and the fact that it feels so realistic is just like a proof of how good of a writer Vuong is, and I cannot recommend this book enough. The next two books I'm talking about together as a pair because they're by the same author. They're both poetry collections by the author Mary Oliver, and they're respectively called Blue Horses and Dream Work. And in her poetry, Mary Oliver explores the range of human emotions through a lot of nature imagery. Often she references the trees, the sky, and animals. She also happens to be a lesbian who wrote beautiful poems about her wife, and while some of her poems are a little bit more complex, I would still say that a lot of her poetry is accessible, so it's a great starting point for people wanting to get into poetry. And if you want to get a glimpse of her writing, I will be sharing one of her poems, which is called Wild Geese. It's one of my favorites, so beautiful and comforting. The next book I'm going to be recommending to you is Open Water by Caleb Azumah Nelson. Despite its very short length, it packs a lot and a lot of emotions. In this book, we follow our main character Guy. He's Black, British, a photographer, and he lives in London. One night in a bar, he meets a girl who's also Black, British. She's a dancer, so also an artist. She can very much understand his own experience. And throughout the book, we can see that through conversation about identity and music and artistry, they form quite a deep connection. But as they get closer, our main character Guy, he starts to distance himself from this girl because he's internally dealing with the emotional fatigue that comes with the racist violence he experiences and witnesses on a daily basis. And I really think that this book perfectly portrays how being perceived as a Black body rather than a person will mess with your mental health. It also shows how easy it is to isolate yourself further and reject outside help when you've been broken down by the system and you've learned to fear vulnerability. And I think that in this book, the writing style is unique. It uses the second person pronouns to immerse the reader further into the story as if we were living it. It was such a great read, and you can pause right here to read an excerpt and see how beautifully it's written. The next book I'll be mentioning, I have the French copy, but it's Jiyoung Born 1982 by Nam-Joo. The first chapter starts with our main character. She's a Korean woman, and she's seemingly, I don't like that term, but losing it in terms of mental health. And then the book kind of like rewinds back in time and shows us a supercut of the sexism she experienced throughout every stage of her life, from before she was even born to her 30s, I think. As a mother and a wife, we see how her experience as a woman has shaped her and led eventually to the decline of her mental health. The author includes some statistics into the book, but she managed to include all of those numbers without making it feel like a non-fiction theory book or an infographic. I would say that it's seamlessly woven into the story to show us that Kim Ji-young's case is not the exception, sadly, but rather the norm. and it's not just a figment of the author's imagination, but it's really a representation of all women in Korea and arguably in the entire world. It's a very short but gripping and effective book that I think everyone ought to read. Let me take a break and sip some tea. The next book I don't have a copy of because I lent it to my friend, but it's Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, and James Baldwin is an exceptional writer. Giovanni's Room honestly took my breath away. So it follows David, an American expat living in Paris, and while living in France he meets this Italian guy named Giovanni, and they start spending a lot of time together. Sus for the 1950s, and they fall for each other eventually. Sadly, we know how things were for gay people in the 50s, so of course their relationship is closeted, it's a secret, and throughout the book we witness how systemic as well as internalized homophobia and toxic masculinity eat away at them and deprives them from the happy ending they deserve, really. So I'm not gonna lie, it's a devastating book, but James Baldwin has such a talent with words, honestly, and despite the book being around like 150 pages, it's a very tiny book. Technically it's a quick read, but you get so invested in the characters and in their story. This book just lingers with you forever after you're done, even though you read it so fast. It was honestly my favorite book of 2021. Also, as someone whose first language isn't English, I would say that it's a great way to start getting into classics because it's a modern classic. So a lot of the language, I would say, is more understandable than older classics. I think Giovanni's Room is a great way to start and slowly work your way back in time. Next book I will be talking about, guys, it's called Your Silence Will Protect You, and it's a collection of Audre Lorde's prose and poetry. And if you don't know who Audre Lorde is, my co-host and bestie Sumaya, who's also making videos on this very channel, she made a video about Audre Lorde, so you can go check it out in the description or over here. But in short, Audre Lorde was a brilliant author who described herself as a black lesbian mother, warrior, and poet. That's strong. And the essays and poems in this collection explore exactly those identities and questions that are raised by belonging to them all at once. It's kind of like intersectional feminism before the term intersectional feminism was even invented, if you will. This book is just brilliant. Every essay is mind-blowing, every poem is beautifully crafted, and Audre Lorde is an icon. She's an icon. If you want to educate yourself on like feminism and anti-racism and anti-homophobia or lesbophobia, I think this is a great place to start, especially if you want to challenge your ideas a little bit. Next book, also a French copy. Bel-Ami is a French classic written by the man, the icon Guy de Maupassant. It follows the story of George. He is this ex-army man who becomes a journalist, like kind of like out of the blue, but it happened a lot in the 1890s, which is when the story happens. It's a social commentary and a critic of 19th century society, almost like a satire that exposes many issues of the moment, including the corrupt, dishonest, capitalistic, and decadent world of journalism at the time. It's also a critic of bourgeoisie, which is very, very much a common theme in 19th century French literature. The French love a good revolution or rebellion against the system. I feel like if you enjoy The Picture of Dorian Gray or the book or the movie adaptation of Lost Illusions, you'll definitely like this one. I feel like it has a similar tone and very similar themes in the sense that it's decadent and extra and edgy for its time, especially for a classic, and it's so entertaining, but also it has so many underlying critics of like actual real issues, some of which are still relevant to this day. Next book is Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. Now let me preface this by making it clear that I absolutely despise the way Murakami writes women sometimes. Let's not lie, they're overly sexualized. About 20% of his books are just like descriptions of women's breasts for some reason, and quite often the female protagonist only serve as a plot device to like facilitate the male protagonist's growth or self-discovery journey. A feminist Japanese author called Mieko Kawakami has addressed this. She confronted Murakami in an interview, and I'll link it in the description below because it's a very interesting read. Now that it's been said and done, he's a great storyteller. Norwegian Wood is a brilliant display of his talents as a writer. It follows a college student. He's called Toru Watanabe, and he's grieving the loss of his best friend called Kizuki. He starts spending a lot of time with Naoko. She was Kizuki's girlfriend before his death, so his dead best friend's girlfriend. They form a deep connection and they get closer because of course they're grieving the same person, so you know, no one can really understand them better than they do understand each other. However, things get more complicated as Naoko is confronted with some past trauma resurfacing and causing mental health issues, and Toru is lonelier than ever. He doesn't know how to cope with his grief, and he also gets in a weird love triangle where whatever he decides, someone will inevitably get hurt. So it's a devastating book. You got it, but God, it's beautiful. So yeah, gotta give it to Murakami. The last book, I also left my copy at my parents' home, but it is Hunger by Roxane Gay. It's a memoir where she recalls the most dramatic events of her childhood, and she explores how it basically affected her relationship to food and to her body. She also talks about what it's like navigating through life and relationships as a fat black woman in a world that's very much racist, misogynistic, and fatphobic. Some parts of this book resonated with me a lot and really hit close to home for obvious reasons, and I would recommend it to anyone, honestly, whether you're plus size yourself or if you're thinner or straight size person, but you know, you just believe in body positivity and you want to dig deeper than the sometimes surface level conversations we tend to see on social media. So that's it for today's video. So let me know if you have read and loved any of these books. Let me know if you plan on picking up any of the ones I've mentioned today. Subscribe to our channel, follow our Instagram, all that self-promo stuff. Please do it if you want to. I hope you're having a great rest of your day or evening, depending on where in the world you are, and I cannot wait to see you again. Bye.